Limits. Everyone has them. It was Tuesday evening, and I was lying in bed waiting for my wife Wendy to finish in the bathroom and join me. Even though our honeymoon was over, Wendy and I continued to have sex almost every day. I hoped she would be in the mood tonight. I smiled to myself as she strutted into our bedroom. She was naked and looked damn sexy. Wendy is 32 years old, blue-eyed blonde with a runner's build. She has slender, sexy curves, round, perky C-cup breasts, a toned stomach, and incredibly long legs that seem capable of wrapping around me twice. "Hi, baby. Can I ask you a favor?" she asked. I reached for my mostly limp manhood, stroked him a couple of times, and answered, "What will I get in return?" "You dirty old man. You know what you'll get." "What kind of favor, honey?" Wendy reached over to her desk and grabbed her iPad before crawling into bed next to me. Snuggling close to me, she said, "I'm following this new author on Literotica. His name is Hipster, and I think he's a pretty good storyteller. I read a story he published a few months ago, Joy Meets Her Bull, and I thought it was cool. Would you mind reading so we can talk about it?" Wendy handed me her tablet, and I opened the page. I didn't tell her that I'd read a few of Hipster's stories and wasn't particularly impressed. His stories didn't have a lot of sex, and those stories that did have sex scenes were childish and very unrealistic. I quickly skimmed to the end of the first page and was thrilled to see that I only had to read 2 pages of his ramblings. As I began to read, Wendy trailed kisses down my body and began to caress my now-erect male instrument. Continuing to caress, Wendy said, "Tell me when you get close to the end." The story was incredibly stupid and centered on a rich, dominant black man and his online seduction of a white couple into the cuckold lifestyle. As is usually the case with this kind of nonsense, the 50-year-old bull had a huge blackmail tool that could stay hard for hours. The white husband was a weakling with a pinky tool and an insatiable desire to drink another man's seed while caressing his wife's private part after she had been used. The white wife was a woman with great intelligence combined with sexual innocence and the body of a porn star who wanted to be used like a slut. Under normal circumstances, this kind of story would not have excited me even after a week of fishing with my buddies, but this was not a normal circumstance. In this case, Wendy relentlessly caressed my manhood with her plump red lips. I was hot and horny, and Wendy kept me on the edge of climax. When I noticed that I had a few paragraphs left to go, I said, "I'm going to finish the story." Wendy straddled my body and began to bounce on me while caressing her body with her hands. Instead of reading the whole story, I threw the iPad aside and grabbed Wendy by the waist. Soon, we both reached our climax. Satisfied for now, Wendy collapsed onto my chest. I rolled us over onto our sides, and we cuddled together in post-climax bliss. "Will you do something nasty for me, baby?" "It will be so hot," Wendy whispered in my ear a few moments later. "Nasty and hot? What do you need, my love?" "I want you to caress me," Wendy begged. "Can you caress my private part now, please? For me?" Her big blue eyes looked at me intently. Since our relationship began, we have had wild sex hundreds of times, and before having sex for the second time, we caressed each other's private parts. I didn't mind the taste of the seed as long as it was my seed. "What's the matter, Wendy?" "Don't overdo it, my love," she answered. "Please caress me and make me climax again. Is this just about you and me, Wendy? Have you fantasized about having sex with some other guy and wanting me to fondle you afterwards?" "No. I promise," she said. "This story has turned me on, and I just want to reach the climax while you do it." For me, the key words were, "I promise." I have never seen Wendy suppress the truth, much less lie to me. I hissed in her ear, "I'm going to caress your slutty little private part until you explode." I did what she asked. Wendy instantly exploded. She arched her lower back and lifted her ass off the mattress and moaned as she climaxed. For the next 30 minutes, I continued to comply with her request. She reached the finish line 2 more times and then begged, "No more." Wendy looked like a rag doll as I changed positions for the second round. Wendy was right. Today's sex was vicious and hot. I exploded after 10 minutes of hard sex. The next couple of weeks passed. We had our usual sex almost every night. On every third or fourth play date, Wendy would ask me to repeat the recent experience. As a reward for the mind-blowing climaxes she was receiving, I got more opportunities to fuck her where she was sitting. I loved it. One evening, Wendy and I had finished dinner and were cleaning the kitchen. I had just turned on the dishwasher when I noticed she was opening a bottle of wine. She poured 2 glasses, looked at me, and asked, "Can we sit and talk on the patio?" Certainly, went. We walked through the backsliding door onto the patio of our home. We sat across from each other at a table in the backyard. I asked, "What happened?" I noticed that Wendy's upper chest and neck area turned slightly red as she said, "I was thinking about that story written by Hipster, and I've read other stories about cuckolds. They really turn me on." When I didn't answer, Wendy asked, "What do you think?" Last week I read an article about Descent on the Literotica website. The story was about a married woman who cheated on her husband. The neighbor discovered her infidelity and framed the cheating slut. She was blackmailed and spent the weekend being gang-sexed by a group of 20 men on a stag weekend. The story was incredibly well written and got me excited. Just because a story excites us doesn't mean we want it to happen. "Stories like this are disgusting," Wendy said dismissively. I replied, "In real life it was disgusting, but as a fantasy story it was cool." After a short pause, Wendy collected her thoughts and asked, "Have you ever thought about the swinger lifestyle?" "Of course," I answered. "Be more specific." Wendy shrugged and said, "I don't know." "Do you have any fantasies about swingers?" "I suppose so," I agreed. "It would be hot if you dressed up in that sexy black dress, put on some makeup, and went to the cocktail bar alone." I definitely got Wendy's attention as I continued. "You could flirt and maybe even dance with a sexy young girl, pick her up, bring her home, and let me seduce her and have sex while you watch." My wife was clearly unhappy, but I continued. "That's a pretty hot swinger's fantasy, don't you agree?" I asked her. "That's disgusting," was Wendy's immediate response. "This kind of crap doesn't happen. I bet I can find over 100 similar fantasy stories on Literotica. Do you want to argue?" Wendy didn't answer, and we both sat in awkward silence for the next few minutes. Finally, I asked, "What's the matter, Wendy?" When she didn't answer, I asked, "Are you trying to cuckold me? Do you want me to watch other men fuck you?" A full 2 minutes passed before Wendy responded. "This idea excites me like hell," she said. There was a long second of silence before Wendy asked, "Will you do me a favor?" I didn't want to commit myself, so I shrugged. She continued, "Would you consider trying it?" I admit that I was more than a little angry, but I controlled myself. Wanting to clear things up, I asked, "Do you want me to think about watching another man have sex with you?" I let the silent tension build, and when Wendy didn't answer, I finally asked, "Will you do me a favor?" Wendy's eyes narrowed. Assuming she had no choice, she nodded in agreement. "I'll think about being humiliated by a cuckolded sissy if you think about being a 32-year-old divorced slut." "Who the hell is talking about divorce?" was Wendy's immediate response. "Wendy, we both come from divorced families," I explained. "We talked about loyalty before we became exclusive, and again after you accepted my proposal. We swore to be faithful. We took the same vow at our wedding." Wendy's eyes filled with tears as I continued. "You married a single man, but I haven't changed," I said. I stood up and took the last sip of wine from my glass. "What if it's important for me to try playing cuckold on a date?" I heard her words from behind my shoulder. I turned and looked at Wendy for a few seconds before picking up my wine glass and staring at it for a long moment. With a flick of my wrist, I threw the glass into our stone fire pit. It shattered into pieces. "My God!" Wendy screamed. "Your grandmother gave you this glass 2 days before her death. You treasured it." Looking back at Wendy, I told her, "I value a faithful marriage 10,000 times more than a glass of wine. But I will just as easily give it up if you don't keep your promises." It was cold before bed that evening, but over the next few days, everything returned to almost normal. On a Wednesday afternoon a couple of weeks later, My best friend and business partner knocked on my open office door. Ben asked, "Do you have a couple of minutes?" Ben and I met in college. He majored in botany, and I studied landscape architecture and design. After high school, Ben and I bought matching used Ford F-150 pickups and went into business together. I designed and supervised the construction of our facilities, while Bean identified the best plants to decorate my finished project. The first 2 years were difficult and we barely survived. By year 5, we breathed a sigh of relief, and by the 10th anniversary of our partnership, we had a successful small business. Over the years, I met and married Wendy, and Ben married Sherry. We were close as couples, but Wendy and Sherry didn't hit it off right away. Wendy works by the book and is a registered nurse at our local pediatric hospital. Sherry is a free spirit and an herbalist. She also taught dance a couple of nights a week. Ben and I have been thrilled that the girls have become closer friends over the past couple of years. I told Ben, "Yes, give me a second," and pointed to the chair opposite my desk. When I finished calculating the design a few moments later, I looked up and saw that Ben had poured a couple of inches of bourbon into 2 glasses. He walked back towards my desk before turning around. He walked back to the bookshelf and grabbed the bottle of bourbon. He brought 2 glasses and a bottle to my table before plopping down in a chair. "Is everything that bad?" I asked. Ben took a few moments to collect his thoughts and asked me a question. "Are you familiar with the saying, 'Men are from Mars and women are from Venus'?" "I think that was originally the title of the book," I replied. Ben seemed to ignore me and continued. "One of the differences between the sexes is the way they talk about sex," he said. "When men talk about their sex lives to other men, it is very impersonal. We've known each other for almost 15 years, and all you know about my sex life is that I like girls and I like sex. I know just as much about you." Looking at me, he asked, "Do you agree?" I nodded in agreement. "Girls are different. When they talk about sex, they are incredibly detailed. They share all their delicious details. When girls talk about sex, there aren't many secrets." I wasn't sure if I agreed with Ben, but I knew he was trying to say something. "Okay," I said, waiting for him to continue. He took a sip from his glass and then pointed at my glass. I followed suit before he continued. "I need to talk to you about my sex life with Sherry," he said. When Ben took his second sip, I didn't need any encouragement. I drained my glass and moved it to refill it. "Did you know that shortly after we started dating, Sherry introduced me to the swingers lifestyle?" I shook my head, and Ben continued. "For Sherry and me, sex and love were completely different," he said. "We fell in love and committed ourselves to each other, but we attended swap parties and had willed sex with everyone we liked. I know our views on love and sex are unusual, but it worked for us. Are you still with me?" I replied that I was listening, and Ben continued. "Over the past few years, we have changed the situation a little. We're still regular members of a couple of swinger groups, but we're learning the hot wifey dynamic. Do you know what this is?" It started to dawn on me what Ben wanted to talk about. "Yes," I told him. "Sherry dates other guys and has sex with them." "Do you think I screwed up?" Ben asked. "Honestly, I don't care what 2 or 5 or 25 consenting adults do." "I really don't care," I told him. "But you should know that this kind of shit is not for me." Ben nodded in agreement before I even finished. Sherry was talking to Wendy about playing hot wife and cuckold. Over the past couple of months, Wendy's interest had gone from slightly amused to hypnotized. I told Ben about the incident after reading Hipster's story and told him about our fight on the back patio. I ended by saying, "I told Wendy that I would consider the benefits of playing cuckold if she considered the consequences, including divorce." What was her reaction? Ben wanted to know. I sighed and said, "You just used the word hypnotize. I think that's the perfect word. She's hypnotized." I shocked Wendy when I mentioned the divorce, but I don't think it had a lasting effect. "It's because of Sherry's influence. Ben was right. I felt lost." "We're going to have dinner and a dance on Friday," Ben reminded me. "I think the girls are planning something." My emotions quickly changed from confusion to royal rage. What the hell are they going to do? I don't know. I would tell you if I knew. It just makes my stomach ache that they're taking steps to get you interested in dating a hot wifey. I'm going to cancel Friday night, I said, anger rising in my voice. This is bullshit. We both took a sip of our bourbon before Ben said he had a proposal. My dead eyes glared at Ben. He shrugged and said, I would consider letting their plan go ahead. Don't put off the inevitable. Let's face it. I considered Ben's offer. It made sense, but not trusting my voice, I nodded. Ben could tell I was overcome with emotion. He told me, you know I'll have your back, isn't it? I squeezed out a half smile and said, yes, thank you. Ben poured me a third drink, stood up and walked towards my office door. Before leaving the office, he raised the bottle and said, that's enough for today. I'll return the bottle to you in the morning. On Friday night, Wendy and I met up with Ben and Sherry at the Twilight Room, an upscale steakhouse. As usual, when the four of us got together, we had a great time. To start, we each drank a cocktail, and with dinner we drank 2 bottles of wine. I noticed that Ben followed my example and hardly drank. The girls shared most of the wine. Dinner was amazing. We each ordered a gourmet dessert and divided it into 4 parts. I was relieved when we were able to finish a wonderful dinner without any negative discussions, but I suspected Ben was right. The girls had a plan, and it was going to happen in the Twilight Room while we danced. Wanting to test my theory, I asked, would anyone mind if we went to Tumbleweeds for some country dancing instead of the Twilight Room? I'm in the mood for a little line dancing. Wendy's face showed a deep concern, far more than a simple change of plan would have justified. Sherry saved the day by saying, Chris, I told a few of my girlfriends that we were going to be in the Twilight Room. I wouldn't want any of them to come alone and have no one to sit with. I would appreciate it if we could stay in the Twilight Room. As a gentleman, I agreed. Ben caught my eye. He also noticed Wendy's strange behavior. Since Sherry is a dance instructor, she put a lot of time and effort into training Ben and me. We are actually very good dancers and enjoy being on the dance floor. When the music started, the 4 of us were in each other's arms. We danced for about 30 minutes before Sherry and Ben returned to our table. As the next dance came to an end, Wendy said, let's take a break. I need to catch my breath. Are you sure, love? I could dance with you all night. Wendy said, I'm ready to drink my drink. Pulling her close, I said to Wendy, I feel close when we dance. Will you promise me to dance every dance tonight? Wendy didn't answer my question. Instead, she kissed me on the cheek, took my hand, and led me back to our table. As we approached our friends, I saw Sherry and Wendy exchange an unspoken sign. We had barely returned to our table and sipped our drinks when a handsome man about 5 years older than us approached the table. Addressing his question to Sherry, he extended his hand and asked, Can I ask you to dance? Sherry smiled and, looking at Ben, asked, Do you mind? Ben nodded approvingly, and when Sherry returned to the dance floor, Ben gave me a very aggressive look. I was on my guard. A moment later, a second man approached our table and asked Wendy, Would you like to dance with me? Wendy was thoughtful as she turned to me. I don't want to be rude, was her weak answer. You do not mind, do you? I looked at my wife and said, 5 minutes ago, we agreed to save all our dances for each other. I stood up and extended my hand to her, telling the guy, No, thank you. I'm going to dance with my wife. I thought Ben would choke on his drink as he tried not to smile. I led Wendy back to the dance floor and we danced through 5 more songs. I noticed Sherry and Wendy exchange a few disappointed glances. When Wendy insisted we rest, we joined Ben and Sherry. Neither of them looked happy, and I suspected they had exchanged a few angry words. After a short rest, Sherry said, Chris, we haven't danced yet. Let's go too? Wendy nodded approvingly and was shocked when I said, I'm in the mood to spend as much time as I can dancing with my wife. I tapped Ben on the shoulder and said, Take your girlfriend there. We will join you soon. 2 songs later, the man who had danced with Sherry earlier came up to us. He told me, I noticed that your girlfriend is tapping her finger on her leg. Would you mind if I asked her to dance? I told him, My wife is resting. We'll join our friends. I pointed to Ben and Sherry. When she's ready to dance again. Thank you. Sherry and Ben returned to our table after the next dance. Sherry grabbed Wendy's wrist and announced, "We're going to the ladies' room." After they left, I asked Ben, "Do you know these two assholes?" He nodded and said, "I know the one above. He is Sherry's friend." Sex buddy? I wanted to clarify. Yes. Why were you both angry when Wendy and I came back? Ben smiled and told me, "Sherry wanted me to get you to dance with her so that asshole could spend his time dancing with Wendy." I was furious and hissed, "What are they trying to achieve?" Sherry convinced Wendy that you would be delighted to watch her dance with other men. This is the first step to dating a hot wife. This is more like the first step towards divorce. That's what I told Sherry, Ben admitted. Listen, I said, looking intently at Ben. They are planning something in the toilet. Whatever it is, Wendy will outright ignore my desires to spend every dance with her. If this happens, I'm leaving. I expect you to give me at least a 20-minute head start before you take Wendy home. Depending on how angry I get, you might have a new roommate for a few days. Just like Ben said, I saw Sherry and Wendy come out of the restroom. When they got to the dance floor, Sherry took Wendy's hand, led her onto the dance floor, and they began to dance together. Ben and I have seen them dance together many times. They were damn sexy. Most nights I would enjoy watching them from my seat, but tonight was not that kind of night. Like sharks smelling blood, the two idiots approached the girls and joined them in a fast dance. They're going to stay there until the next slow dance, right? Frowning, Ben said, "That's my guess." I watched 2 more fast dances in which all the participants were talking to each other, keeping a respectful distance. As the next slow dance began, each woman melted into the arms of her partner. I looked at Ben and reminded him that I needed a 20-minute head start. Wendy was wrapped in an intimate dance hug as I stood up, put on my sports jacket, and headed for the door. I never looked back. I intentionally turned off my phone as I pulled out of the parking lot. I was driving fast, but I didn't want to be stopped. I returned home and threw enough clothes for a couple of days into my gym bag. When Wendy and I go on a date, she doesn't take her keys with her. I secured the back door with an extra latch and double-checked our windows. I disabled the garage door opener and manually locked the garage door. I knew Ben and Sherry had a key to our front door. They didn't have a deadbolt key, which we only used when we went on vacation. Once the house was locked, I headed to the Marriott Hotel on the other side of town. I didn't sleep Friday night, but instead of tossing and turning, I made a list of things I needed to do if Wendy and I were going to break up. I didn't want to disturb anyone's sleep on a Saturday morning, so I waited until 10 a.m. to turn on the phone and make a couple of calls. I called 2 close friends who were recently divorced and found out the name of the best divorce lawyer. Luckily, she was open on Saturday mornings, and I was able to get an appointment for Monday at 7 a.m. After making an appointment, I checked my messages and found 14 voicemails and 26 text messages. All were from Wendy or Sherry, except for one from Ben. "I'm going to stay in the office until I hear from you." I sent him a reply message. "I can be there in 10 minutes. I found Ben in his office. He looked just as bad as I did. Wendy is panicking. That's how it should be. I have a meeting with a divorce lawyer on Monday." "Damn it," Ben grumbled. "Are you really going to divorce her?" "I don't know what else to do, Ben. At a minimum, I want to know my options." Ben and I sat for another 2 hours. We talked about the possibility of reconciliation. However, if that happened, I needed a plan to make sure Sherry didn't continue to influence Wendy. Ben agreed to help me and would be my eyes and ears. When he went home, I suggested, "You can tell Wendy that we can talk. Tell her she can come to my house after her shift at the hospital on Monday. Then we'll talk." On Sunday, I met a divorced friend on his yacht in Long Island Sound, and he recommended his lawyer to me. We swam all day, and that evening, I treated him to a lobster dinner before heading back to the Marriott. I was in a surprisingly good mood. The next day at 7 a.m., I met with attorney Bev Carr, and she explained my rights in the divorce process. She recommended that I talk to Wendy and try to work things out. I knew it was an option and hoped it would work, but I gave Bev a deposit and asked her to write the divorce petition. I was hoping I wouldn't need it, but I wanted to have it ready just in case. Bev also recommended making an appointment with a local private investigator. Depending on the outcome of our conversation, the private investigator could confirm that Wendy remained within the confines of our consummated marriage. I got to the office only at 11 a.m. As soon as I crossed the threshold, Sherry pounced on me and demanded, "Where the hell have you been?" The frustration that had built up over the weekend exploded, and I took 2 quick steps in her direction. Ben was just as fast. He hugged me tightly and pushed me against the wall. "Don't touch her, Chris. Nothing good will happen if you do this." When I turned around and looked at Ben, I saw that he had my best interests at heart. My buddy really had my back, even when his wife was involved. When Ben and I untangled myself, I growled at Sherry, "Get the fuck out of here. If you don't leave in a minute, I'll call the police." "Chris, I'm just here to help," I exploded. "Fuck you, darling. The only thing you care about is turning my wife into a slut like you." "I'm not a slut, you asshole. Ben and I have an agreement and a completely acceptable relationship." "You do have an agreement. You and Ben both agree that you can be a slut," I said. After a moment of silence, I decided to continue. "Leave me alone, darling," I said. "I need to decide whether I'm going to file for divorce." Sherry was standing in the middle of our office when I turned and left, slamming my office door. It's time to plan. My conversation with Wendy was disappointing. On Monday evening, I returned to the locked house. Wendy arrived exactly at 7 p.m. and burst through the front door screaming, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." When she threw herself into my arms and begged, "Please forgive me," I thought that maybe there was a chance that we could undo the damage that had been done. "Let's talk," I suggested, when Wendy loosened her tight hug. Together we walked to the kitchen table. "Have you actually met with a divorce lawyer?" Wendy asked. Nodding slowly, I said to Wendy, "I want to clarify my rights and confirm that the house and business will remain with me, since I purchased them before we got married." "Chris, please." "I don't want to talk about divorce. I promised myself I wouldn't mention it as a possibility, and it ends up being the first thing I ask." She calmed down before asking, "Can I say a few things?" When I nodded in agreement, Wendy said, "I'm ashamed that I allowed these stupid fantasy stories, along with Sherry and Ben's lifestyle, to affect our marriage. I told my parents the full and honest truth, and they are also ashamed of me." Through my hospital, I made an appointment with a psychologist. Our first meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, and I will meet with her twice a week until I can get my head together and understand how I became so stupid. I smiled at Wendy because a consultation was something I would have insisted on. I also called Sherry. That's how I found out that you went to see a divorce lawyer. I told Sherry I wasn't going to talk to her for a while. It doesn't really matter, but she agreed that it was a good idea if I hoped to make things work with you. She ended with a plea. "Chris, we can't make things work if we don't stay together. First, will you let me sleep in the guest bedroom? Please." We didn't have sex until the following weekend. We were horny as old goats and had sex until I had 2 climaxes, and Wendy had several more. Wendy returned to our bedroom halfway through the 2nd month. We had been close almost every day for the previous couple of weeks. Half the time we had sex and half the time we made love. By the 5th month, we were as close to normal as I had ever expected. I was completely happy. It was a pleasant surprise. One day I pulled into our office parking lot, and as I was getting out of my truck, Ben came out of the office door. With a shrug, Ben indicated that he wanted me to follow him. Together we walked the 50 meters to the first of 25 greenhouses we used to grow Ben's plants. I followed Ben to his orchid room, where he grew his award-winning orchids. I watched him silently for over 15 minutes as he examined a new batch of crossed flowers. Without looking up from his work, he said, "I canceled our trip to the conference in Orlando." Ben and I were scheduled to attend a 4-day industry conference starting at the end of the week. We rarely went to these events together. More often than not, they would either cover the manufacturing side of the business, and Ben would be there, or the construction side, and I would attend. This year it seemed like a good combination, and Ben and I had been talking about the trip for weeks. I had a bad feeling when he continued, "Sherry and her last asshole thought I was asleep last night," he said. They were talking about the dinner Sherry is having at my house on Friday while we're gone. Wendy will arrive, and with her the second asshole. I was surprised by my emotions. I was angry, but it wasn't the fierce anger I had been 6 months ago. Instead, I was mostly tired, sick and exhausted. I took out my phone and called Bev Carr, my lawyer. Surprisingly, I was able to talk to her immediately. I was able to confirm that a petition for divorce had been prepared. I told Bev that I would arrange through the process server to have the documents collected in the next few days. Just as I was about to pass out, Ben said, "Let me talk to her." I listened as Ben introduced himself. He told Bev that he wanted to prepare the divorce papers and that he needed them ready by the end of the week. Apparently, Bev agreed and told Ben to come to her office immediately. This week, Wendy worked the 4 p.m. to midnight shift. Staying away from the slut wasn't hard. On Wednesday, she wrote, "I haven't heard from you or seen you for 2 days. Are you okay?" I waited until her shift started. She was not allowed to use a cell phone, and answered, "Busy." Wendy tried to call on Thursday morning. I ignored the call, and she didn't leave a voicemail but did send a text message. "Come home for lunch. We can have some quick sex before you go to the airport." I waited until 1:30 before sending a reply message. "I'm leaving for the airport from my place of work." She called 3 times in a row. I ignored every call and didn't listen to the voicemail she left after the 3rd call, other than sending her a message saying we had successfully arrived in Florida, which was a lie. I ignored all messages from Wendy. On Friday afternoon, we were sitting at our neighbor Ben's dinner table. The neighbor was away on vacation, but agreed to give Ben access to his home. Ben and I were sitting with our private investigator, Lou. The 4th person at the table was my old friend Larry Baxter. Larry is a sergeant in our local police department, and he agreed to serve the divorce papers. We had a significant advantage when Larry was on our team, since he was 190 centimeters tall and weighed 120 kilograms. He was a giant. We had 2 laptops on the table connected via Wi-Fi 2, audio-visual cameras strategically placed throughout Ben's house. We watched as Wendy arrived at 5:30 p.m. The slut was wearing my favorite blue strappy dress. She couldn't wear a bra with her dress, and I suspected she wasn't wearing panties either. These idiots arrived in different cars, but they coordinated it so that they would arrive at the same time. The first part of the evening was the dinner party. They talked in the living room and drank cocktails and wine. Sherry served a delicious shrimp pasta that I have tried many times over the years. As dinner progressed, the conversation got a little dicey and then dirty. When cherry pie and ice cream arrived for dessert, the conversation turned lewd. At one point, we heard Sherry ask Wendy, "Who would you like to be your partner for tonight?" She replied, "Since I'm only going to do this once, I think Bill, and then John." Sherry clapped her hands, and Bill and John clapped and high-fived each other. When Wendy continued, everyone in both houses was surprised. She said, "And after that, Bill, John, and Sherry are together." Wendy smiled proudly as her new friends continued to cheer. We immediately left the neighbor's house and were entering Ben's house less than 90 seconds later. Ben headed to the dining room first. Sherry was the first to realize what was happening and moaned, "Damn!" The 2 idiots were grinning like idiots until they saw Larry walk into the room wearing a size XXXL police uniform. Wendy's eyes were as round as saucers and her jaw dropped as Larry approached her. "I'm sorry to have to do this, Wendy, but you're officially served." Wendy's eyes darted between Larry and me as he placed the documents in front of her. Larry tried to continue, but Wendy was confused. Finally, in a loud voice, Larry said, "Wendy!" When Larry got her attention, he continued, "Wendy, there is also a restraining order keeping you away from Chris, his home, and his business. If you come within 150 meters of Chris or the 2 properties, you will be arrested. You understand?" Wendy could barely nod. "As a friend, I would advise you to hire a lawyer." Finally, Larry concluded, "Sherry, you are officially served." Sherry was stunned when the second set of papers was placed in front of her. "The court gave Ben 10 days to remove his property from the house. You understand?" "What the hell is this?" Sherry yelled at Ben. Ben just gave Sherry a disdainful look. "You are also prohibited from approaching his business closer than 150 meters, Larry continued. When the fireworks ended, I laughed. It was a strange sound, considering the circumstances. When I got everyone's attention, I said to the idiots, pointing at Wendy, "Hey guys, this slut likes to be punched in the place she sits on, and she doesn't need lube." Wendy began to sob hysterically. Larry's booming voice said, "Chris, stop that! Now!" Wendy is quite emotional. Returning his attention to the visitors, he said, "If you'll excuse us, we're leaving. Enjoy the rest of your dinner." An hour after we left, I received a text from Larry. "Wendy left 5 minutes after us," he said. "Looks like Sherry let both idiots stay the night." He also sent me the car registration details of those two idiots. A week later, it was a beautiful Tuesday evening when I pulled into the Lesmore Park parking lot. More than 30 softball games were played there. I sat in the stands, watched the game, and got some fresh air. Afterwards, I followed the players to a bar, a local hangout. The team took a table in the back corner next to another group of baseball players and began swapping stories about their athletic accomplishments. I waited 5 minutes and took a sip of local India Pale Ale before approaching the group. "Are you Bill Weston, right?" I asked. "What do you care about?" He wanted to know. I told him, "Your wife just went into premature labor. A neighbor took her to the hospital." Bill grabbed his phone and looked at it. "Deb would leave me a message if she was in labor." "You're full of crap." "I was with her when it happened," I explained. "I helped her get to the neighbor's car." "Do you know how this happened?" Bill asked. I pulled the flash drive out of my front pocket. I showed it to Bill before throwing it to him. I said, "She went into labor when I showed her the video of you having sex with Sherry Wilson. She never made it to the third video. The one you're on, you have Sherry, is paired with her boyfriend, John." I tossed the second flash drive to John Malloy and told him, "Your wife, Jane, wants me to tell you, don't come home. She's going to serve you with divorce papers sometime next week." "You're the cuckold from Sherry's house," John said, finally recognizing me. "I'm not a cuckold. I handed this slut the divorce papers before she let you into the cesspool between her legs. But your actions led to my divorce, just as my actions today will lead to yours." "You bastard," John growled, rising to his feet. Bill stood up too, along with a couple of his other teammates. Before they could start anything, we heard, "Gentlemen, are there any problems?" All 6 or 7 of Larry Baxter's men came up to me. He continued, "I am an off-duty local police sergeant." He looked at me and winked. "It looks like you're not welcome here," he told me. "It's probably better if you leave." I answered, "Yes, sir." And heading towards the exit, I heard Bill shout, "We're not finished, asshole. I'm going to hunt you down and kill you, bastard." The last thing I heard as I left was, "I am placing you under arrest." Another week later, on a beautiful spring Saturday morning, I was sitting in my kitchen, sipping coffee, when the doorbell rang. Wendy stood on the porch with 3 men. "Hi, Chris," Wendy greeted. "Thanks for lifting the restraining order so I can get my things." "Hello." I nodded in response. Wendy extended her hand and tried to hand me a couple of pieces of lined paper. "This is a list of what I would like." "Take whatever you want," I said over my shoulder, heading back to my coffee mug on the kitchen table. I was sitting on the back patio when I heard the sliding door open about 30 minutes later. Wendy stood in the open doorway, holding our wedding album. "Do you want to share our wedding photos?" She wanted to know. "No, thanks, Wendy." I meant what I said. Take whatever you want. I really don't care. There were tears in her eyes as she turned back into the house. It was around 2:15 p.m. when the door opened again. Wendy brought over a glass of wine and a can of the same local craft beer that was on the table. Placing the glass of wine on the table, she opened a can of beer and poured it into my glass. She asked, "Can we talk for one beer?" Wanting to be an asshole, I took my glass and drank the beer in one gulp. I was stunned by the level of surprise and sadness in Wendy's eyes. When she started sobbing, I said, "Stop crying, Wendy. Can we talk?" I got up and went to the kitchen. After filling the ice bucket, I put the open bottle of Chablis in it, along with 2 more bottles of beer, and returned to the patio. As I sat down, Wendy said, "I've never had sex with them." I sighed and told her, "You've been scheming, lying, and cheating on me ever since you made me read that stupid story. The only reason you didn't have sex is because I caught you." While Wendy took a healthy sip of wine, I asked, "Tell me about seducing Sherry." "Sherry didn't try to seduce me. She didn't just try, she managed to seduce you," I answered. "Besides not making you spread your legs in front of her asshole friends, she seduced you in all other ways." "Chris, I don't want to argue." "I'm not arguing," I objected. "I'm just telling you how I see things. Letting Sherry seduce you was 10 times worse than being seduced by a man." Wendy looked more than a little confused, so she asked, "Will you tell me what you're thinking?" I waited a few seconds and took a long sip of the cool beer. "I would be devastated if you allowed a man to seduce you. I imagined our first flirtation together at work, at the gym, or wherever. Eventually, flirting would turn into attraction, dating, and finally intimacy. It would destroy me and our marriage. But I understand how someone could be seduced into an affair. But that's not what Sherry did," I continued. "Instead, Sherry convinced you that sex with any man would have a positive effect on our marriage." When Wendy tried to interrupt me, I waved her off. "Don't start, Wendy," I said. "I'm not saying Sherry was going to set you up with an 80-year-old man, but there was nothing special about the 2 idiots she invited to dinner. They were nobody. Sherry convinced you to give up your marriage for 2 strong man tools." Wendy stared at the tabletop for a long moment before reluctantly admitting that my thoughts were correct. "Everything sounded so exciting coming from Sherry," Wendy said. "She talked about the anticipation of swingers' parties and all the crazy things she was exposed to, too. Sherry admitted that she liked dating the hot wife even more. She felt empowered as she went to the bar with Ben, flirting and dancing with the men while he watched, and finally choosing her date for the night." "That's what I'm getting at, Wendy. Sherry went to those bars and picked up a man she didn't know," I said. "On those dates, every man was better than Ben. This is fucking disgusting, just like your date at dinner at Sherry's house." After a short pause, Wendy asked, "Why is Ben divorcing Sherry?" "For much the same reason I'm divorcing you. He no longer trusts or respects her. She deliberately ruined the marriage of his best friend and business partner, and he doesn't want to be married to such a vile person." We both paused for a moment and thought about our predicament. "I know that I was completely unfair to you. You've been warning me since the first night you read that stupid story. But Ben is unfair to Sherry. They had an agreement." I shrugged and told Wendy, "They did have an agreement, but it didn't include ruining my life. What Sherry did was beyond the scope of their agreement. Also, I don't think Ben was very happy in the cuckold relationship." "Did he tell you this?" Wendy wanted to know. I admitted, "No. But can you imagine a man getting sexual satisfaction from watching his wife have sex with another man? I can't." After another short pause, I asked, "I thought everything was going back to normal when you started going to the therapist. What's happened?" I saw Wendy clench her jaw as she considered my question. Finally, she told me, "I haven't spoken to Sherry for several weeks. Eventually, we started texting and talking. After a few more weeks, we started meeting once or twice a week for coffee. When I didn't answer, she continued. One afternoon, she walked into the cafe and was beaming. I asked her if she had just been to the gym. Sherry told me in great detail that she spent the day with 3 college guys. They took turns having sex with her all day." Wendy shrugged and finished with the words, "I couldn't get it out of my head. My friend was the embodiment of literary fantasy." "Thanks for your honesty, I guess," I replied. I still find it difficult to come to terms with the fact that my idiocy led to 2 divorces. 2? I laughed pretty hard. "What's so funny?" Wendy wanted to know. "Your idiocy led to 7 divorces." "How the hell did you figure that out?" Wendy asked. "You and me." I raised one finger. "Ben and Sherry." I raised a second finger. After you left Sherry's party, she took those two idiots to her bedroom. Ben set up the camera. I took the video to their wives. Both filed for divorce. I raised my third and ring fingers. Wendy's eyes widened when I admitted that there were cameras in Sherry's bedroom. She asked, "Do you have a video of—" A sudden sob did not let her finish. "Do I have a video of the gangbang last Sunday afternoon?" "Yes, I have. 3 out of 5 guys were married. I shared a video of their 3 very unhappy wives. They are all in the process of filing for divorce. You caused 7 divorces, Wendy." I stood up from the table on the patio and walked out without looking back. I walked through the patio door, locked it behind me, and drew the curtains on the door. 8 years later, it was only 9:30 p.m. After the men helped clean up the backyard and the women helped around the house, about 50 guests left after a very festive day celebrating Ben's 40th birthday. Our wives were curled up on the living room couch, relaxing. They've been there for the last hour. Ben and I were together on the back patio. We sat by his fireplace and sipped a very expensive bourbon that someone had given Ben as a gift. "Remember when you told me that men are not supposed to talk in detail about their sex lives?" I asked. Ben chuckled and said, "Perhaps I will remember part of this conversation." I asked, "Are you and Abby?" The rest was left unsaid. Ben was already smiling and shaking his head. "We are faithful to each other and monogamous." I raised a toast to my friend and said, "I'm glad." We stared at the fire for a few minutes before Ben admitted, "I've come to the conclusion that there's not much love in a relationship like this." When we heard the patio door open, Ben and I turned to see his 8-month pregnant wife, Abby, leading his 3-year-old son out the door. They were followed by my 7-month pregnant wife, Brittany. Brittany held our sleeping 2-year-old daughter in her arms. "It's time to leave, Chris." "I'm tired," Britt said. Ben and I smiled as we turned to each other. He raised his glass and made a toast to 2 happy old farts. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story.